To the leader of David, a psalm. I waited and waited for the Lord. He inclined to me and heard me cry. God drew me up from the desolate pit, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. God put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise for our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Happy are those who make the Lord their trust, who do not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after false gods. You have multiplied, O Lord my God, your wondrous deeds and your thoughts towards us. No one can compare with you. Were I to proclaim and tell of them, they would be more than can be counted. Sacrifice and offering you do not desire, but you have given me an open ear. Burnt offering and sin offering you have not required. Then I said, here I am. In the scroll of the book it is written of me, I delight to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I have told the glad news of deliverance in the great congregation. See, I have not restrained my lips, as you know, O Lord. I have not hidden your saving help within my heart. I have spoken of your faithfulness and your salvation. I have not concealed your steadfast love and your faithfulness from the great congregation. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. As for me, I am poor and needy. But the Lord takes thought for me. You are my help and my deliverer. Do not delay, oh my God. So our experiences individually shed some light on who God is, and that's one of the reasons why we participate in this Lenten journey. We might not see God fully in any given moment, but our lives, our experiences, and the experiences of those around us create a collage or a mosaic. And this is one of the reasons why the Psalms are so relatable. It's not because they tell the story of a miraculous healing of an outsider where social norms and cultural barriers are crossed. It's not because they tell the story of a people who were enslaved like the Hebrews were under the Egyptians, forced to make bricks and viewed less than human. It's not because it's some grandiose story about someone who goes against the grain and builds a really big boat, or the epic story of a vision of God that causes scales to fall from their eyes. Psalms are powerful because they express fear and hope, doubt and faith, joy and despair, love and even hate. They express the breadth of the human experience. They are powerful because they are relatable. Because when we hear that faith or doubt, that fear or hope, we too can recall times in our lives when this was true, or maybe is true. Many of us have had an experience where we have been told verbally or thought that there is an example about doubt or fear and anger, and we have been told that they have no place in faith. The Psalms are a direct contradiction to that line of thought, and they give us plenty examples of doubt and fear, or heaven forbid, maybe that we're even a little angry with God. You just think about Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And think of the relationships that you have in your life. Conflict. It's a normal part. So why should we expect to not have conflict or questions as we develop in our relationship with God? Now think about those relationships in your life where you have avoided conflict. Often those relationships fall or grow apart. The Psalms empower us to connect with others who have felt many of the same things, giving license to our feelings and affirming our emotions. Psalm 40 conveys to us a sense of gratitude towards God. It's beautiful because we see someone who is testifying to God's presence and faithfulness while currently in need of deliverance yet again. Now, the end of this psalm is nearly identical to Psalm 70, and so many scholars believe that maybe somebody got a little cut and paste going on here. Someone who wrote this psalm or was compiling the psalms together thought, hey, this part should go with this part. And whether it was written this way or whether it was later adapted, it was put together because it shared an experience that was meaningful. And we can see why it's so meaningful. I mean, look at it. I waited and waited. A lot of translations might actually say I waited patiently, but the more and more I've read on this, it says that's actually not a very good translation because the waiting that's described is one of anxiety, one of wanting to get a move on. It's very detailed. I almost couldn't take it. But yet it was God who heard my cry. It was God who saved me from circumstance X, this near-death experience, one of the most difficult times in my life. We hear this, and then whether you can see that place in your own lives or you can say, I have been there. Or maybe you're looking at that psalm with hope or jealousy because you're saying, I'm there now. You get it too. God picked them up and brought them out of their bog. Not only that, but God set them down upon solid ground and gave them a new song. And if you hear U2 in the background, it's because they wrote a song about it. But I love this language. We sing what is in our hearts as much as what's in our minds. And do you ever find yourself singing a song and not even realizing it? Maybe you're just a hummer like me. But that's okay too, because it symbolizes a state of being, a way of thought, a feeling that's coming out. And imagine that, a state of being that honors God. I think I have seen that in the Gospels. Many will fear and then put their trust in God. Those who do not put their trust in the proud, which could easily mean ourselves, and those who do not put their trust in false idols, which could easily mean ourselves. It's clear that the draw is oftentimes away from God because that might be easier, but it is drawing to God that blesses. If you were with us last week, it would be that water that you drink and you never thirst again. Now this next part is my favorite part. It's a little weird, but that's okay. You have given me an open ear. You don't want burnt sacrifices or offerings. And the Hebrew here is a little bit more descriptive than what our translators have given us. Instead of an ear that's just been opened, it really means something along the lines of ears you have dug out for me. The false idols and pride have built up like a wax in the ear, obstructing your ability to hear and perceive God. Yet it is God who has dug out your ear. It's as if we've been given a new mind, a new way of hearing, a new opportunity to honor God. Well, how do you do that? The psalmist says, well, I'm glad you asked. We say, here I am. It is not burnt offerings or sacrifices that God desires from us. God simply wants us to share our experiences. Share that time you felt all hope was lost, yet God was with you. Share that news of deliverance with your family and with your friends, whether the experience is that this psalmist has had or the story of now as a tool of empowerment. And this is where many scholars believe that the first psalm ends and the second one begins. The psalmist moves from this acknowledgement of being pulled from a prior crisis, and then they move into this other petition, asking God not to leave them, but to save them. The last few verses of the Psalms being nearly identical to Psalm 70. It follows with more thanksgivings and yet more worries. But what I love about the Psalms is they are glimpses of journeys. Each psalm, and together this one might be two or it might be one, but people in different times, different circumstances, different fears or joys, doing their best to draw themselves close to God in the ways that they know how. Psalm 40 shows us an array of things. It represents a journey in many different places, recognizing God's presence before and at the same time hoping that God has not abandoned them in the present. We've talked before about one of my former professors, Walter Brueggemann, and the idea that our lives develop through a process. And for Brueggemann, this process looks like it begins with orientation, meaning we have a worldview. We are comfortable and confident in that worldview. The next step is disorientation, where our worldview is challenged. And this can be anything from the death of a loved one, a career crisis. It could be the birth of a child. It could be anything. And the final step is the reorientation, meaning based on this new experience, our image or understanding of God and the world has been reshaped. Not one time. This is something that happens over and over and over again. Ralph Jacobson, a professor at Luther Seminary, sums this up as he says, "The songs of thanksgiving are reorientation psalms, because they are the songs of praise that are sung by those who have walked the darkest valleys, stood in the midst of the shaking mountains, experienced life when the bottom drops out. Life will never be the same, but God met these sufferers in the depths of their sufferings, and they have a simple message: God found me." Praise the Lord. Another one of our favorite theologians and author goes by the name of C.S. Lewis, and he's written many, many things. From the Chronicles of Narnia to the Screwtape Letters to a book entitled The Problem of Pain, Lewis shares his journey. And I was recently reading an article that showed the reorientation of Lewis's observations, or maybe perhaps the disorientation. In 1940, Lewis authored the book The Problem of Pain. And in it, as a young man, I don't know how old he was, but I'm just assuming since it's 20 years later, he writes another book. In it, he tries to sum up why bad things happen. He says, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. If you're me, you might cringe when you kind of hear that. You're like, oh, that's good. But he wrote another book, so it's okay. It is much later in his life that he writes A Grief Observed, which was authored 21 years later. Lewis's wife passed away, and he has experienced the disorientation, the emptiness, and to use his language from the book, the death of a beloved is an amputation. A Grief Observed is his attempt to express those thoughts, and in it he concludes, when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. Sounds a little bit different. He added, not that I think, in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is coming to believe such dreadful things about him. The conclusion I dread is not, so there's no God after all, but so this is what God's really like. This might seem harsh for us, but if one of our greatest contemporary theologians can express grief and doubt, cannot you and I? Is the spirit of Mother Teresa and her work lessened because the doubts she expressed? Or is it strengthened? The Psalms are a journey just as we are on a journey through the season of Lent. And we may not all be on cloud 9. There is joy in this sanctuary, yet there is sadness. There is despair. There is hope, yet there is grief for some of us. There are stories of encouragement, and there are listening ears recently dug up waiting to hear with compassion. There are stories of hardship and grief which are hoping to be shared tenderly, expressing in them our hearts and that of the heart of our Creator. The Psalms are fitting for Lent. They are fitting for our journey together, whether we find ourselves oriented, disoriented, or in the process of reorienting. Our prayer may it be that as we journey together, with the presence of the one who truly hears. Let us walk together. Amen.